What do you think of when you think of California? For many, it may be beautiful beaches filled with sunbathers and surfers and palm fronds whispering in the ocean breeze. Others may think of historic San Francisco in the sweeping arches of the Golden Gate Bridge. Others still may think of deep, quiet redwood forests with trees so tall they look like they could reach outer space. But what is likely not instantly imagined in the mind's eye when picturing California is being trapped in an underground bunker for 16 hours. Imagine a small, cramped space, made to feel even smaller by oppressive darkness pushing in on you from all sides. Not a sliver of light penetrates into what is quickly beginning to feel like a black hole. The air is thick and heavy, cloying with the stench of human waste and sweat. It's sweltering hot. Every once in a while, sniffles break out, then panicked crying. The sounds of fans have long since died away as the weak attempt at ventilation gave up the ghost. What may be even worse is the sound of creaking, groaning metal as the walls and roof slowly begin to cave in. It's a grim picture, made even worse by what I'm about to tell you. This isn't a made-up scenario. For 26 school children and their bus driver, this exact situation was made all too real on a hot July day in California, 1976. I'm Christiana.
And I'm Bree.
Settle in and don't open your doors.
Because you're about to hear something strange.
Welcome to Episode 7, the Chowchilla School Bus Kidnapping.
Have you ever heard of the Chowchilla School Bus Kidnapping?
Surprisingly, no. And I went through a true crime phase many years ago. I wonder, because as you know, my memory isn't always the best due to my migraines. And I kind of wonder if once you start to dive into it.
You might. It's a strange case.
Okay.
And I'm gonna preface this with everyone lives. No children die.
Spoilers.
Spoiler. Because I don't want people to go into this and be like, oh man, should I listen to this? No children die. The bus driver survives.
That's good.
Yes. I will say it is a bittersweet kind of ending. We'll get there when we get there. But there is no child death involved in this.
Do we have any trigger warnings?
Claustrophobia, being buried alive. If that's something that you're very afraid of, because I know some people are very much that's a very deep-seated fear.
Yeah.
Those are probably the two biggest ones.
Okay.
And just kidnapping in general. I guess I'll just dive in here.
Yeah, because I know nothing.
All right. On July 15th, 1976, 3 men hijacked a school bus containing 26 children and their bus driver. After driving them for hours to an undisclosed location, the kidnappers forced the children and driver down a hole in the ground into a cramped trailer. Essentially, they buried them there and left them alone for hours. Already gave that spoiler alert because I didn't want anyone to panic. Everyone does survive in this situation. So I'm going to dive into just how this all came about. Begin in the tiny town of Chowchilla, California. Chowchilla is located roughly in the middle of the state, about an hour and a half drive from Yosemite National Park. This is based on my look at Google Maps. In 1976, it was described as an agricultural town, and according to survivors, it was a very tight-knit little community. Everyone really looked out for each other. One of the survivors said, no one locked their doors. It was just that kind of community.
So is the town still there today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it still exists. Also, a lot of this information I got from the 48 Hours special about this case. I used other sources as well. So, like I said, our story begins on July 15th, 1976. School bus driver Frank Edward Ray, age 55 at this time, was transporting 26 children from the Dairyland School District home from a day out swimming at the fairgrounds. I found the name Frank Edward Ray in a New York Times news article that was actually published in 1976, which was pretty cool because I got to read. It was on the New York Times website, but it was the original artitle that
they had archived.
Yeah, the archived article. So that was really interesting. But based on all of the other research I've seen, it sounds like he just went by Ed or Edward. And Ed had worked at the school district for 26 years. and really seemed to be liked by everyone. According to survivor Jody Heffington, a survivor who was 10 at the time, she said everybody liked and respected him.
So they'd only be in their 50s.
Yeah, they're really not. They're young. Mm-hmm. Children on the bus at this time were ranged anywhere between 5 and 14 years old. There were 19 girls and 7 boys. So, like I said, the oldest kid on this bus was 14. The children were in a summer session of school. In the mornings, they spent their time in typical, academic classes. But in the afternoons, they were privy to a number of, quote, recreational pursuits, such as swimming. That's why they were out at the fairgrounds that day. When school ended at 3:45 that day, Edward Ray began driving his charges home. He made 3 stops, but the 4th stop never happened. From what I could tell, Edward came across a white van that was parked in the middle of a road at an intersection. He tried to go around the van, but it pulled across the road and blocked him. At that point, a man with a stocking over his head and holding a gun jumped out of the van and ran to the bus door, demanded it to be open. The man proceeded to board the bus and demanded that Ed and the children move to the back. Another man, also with a stocking over his face, boarded the bus as well with a sawed-off double-barrel shotgun. One of the kidnappers then got into the driver's seat and started to drive. A third kidnapper followed them in the white van. Eventually, the bus was driven off the road and parked in a dry riverbed called Barenda Slough, Slough. There was a large grove of bamboo growing there, and there was also a second parked van. This one it looked green in the pictures I was looking at. I think it actually was supposed to be black. So I'm not 100% certain.
This was very premeditated.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the vans was pulled up to the front of the bus door after they stopped the bus, and the children and Ed were made to jump between the 2 vehicles. This was to prevent footprints from showing on the ground.
Really premeditated.
Yes. Inside the vans, so this is think of a big construction van.
Okay.
So you have the front passenger and driver door, and then the 2 back doors that swing open like a set of double doors. That's where they were putting these kids. Inside was paneled, so you could not see out the windows, and the 2 back windows were spray painted black. So it was pitch in there. There was no AC. It was hot. It was crowded. Not a great scenario. They were split between the 2.
Because I couldn't imagine getting
26 children into
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Even, it would have been 27 people with Ed. So 13 and 14 kids, or 14 and 15 in each one.
That's
which is
still a lot.
Insanely crowded.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this is July in California.
Oh.
So obscenely hot.
I'd imagine that's very hot. I've never been to California.
Mm-hmm. It's, and especially right in the middle of the state.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got you off track.
No, that's okay. Ed Ray was taken in the second van. So he was in with, I believe he was in one van, and the oldest kid, Mike, was in another. And especially the really young kids, they were just clinging to the older children, just desperate to find any kind of comfort. It was just a horrific situation. So at this point, back in Chowchilla, the police are getting involved. The parents were starting to realize, hey, my kids never came home from school. Joan Brown, the mother of Jennifer Brown, one of the survivors, noticed the children were missing when she got home from work to find an empty house. She was looking for peanut butter out on the counter. The kids hadn't made snacks. They hadn't made lunch. They hadn't made anything. She was like, wait a minute, something's not right here. So a search went out, and the abandoned bus was spotted about 7 miles outside of Chowchilla by a police airplane. It had been covered by bamboo and other foliage in an attempt to hide it. The sheriff of Madrona County at that time, Ed Bates, noted that no footprints were found, but the scene showed tire tracks from the vans. So again, premeditation. They did that on purpose. In my opinion, they were still stupid because
you're still going to have tracks.
Yeah. Yes. We'll get there.
It's half baked.
Yes. Just you wait. They did find swimsuits, cotton swabs, towels, and books nearby, but there was no indication that any bloodshed had occurred. After the bus was found, a huge search started in the area. It continued by plane, and it was also made up of police, horseback riders, canines, and town residents. Everyone was just looking for these children and for Ed. Unfortunately, the search was unsuccessful. At that point, parents were gathered in the fire station to get updates. They were all gathered in one place so that they could be updated as quickly as possible when new information came out. So back to these poor children and Ed. They were driven in the dark vans for hours while they tried to comfort each other. It was found out later the total drive took around 11 to 12 hours, depending on which source you look at. When they finally reached their destination, where the kidnappers were taking them, the drivers pulled Ed Ray out of the first van before yanking the rest of the children out. But they did this one at a time. So every time they would yank a person out, they would shut the door behind them. That meant these kids still left in the van had no idea what was happening to the people outside. Mike Marshall was the oldest kid in the second van. Yes, I went through that. He was 14. And he stated that the younger children he was with were just, again, clinging to him. At one point, he and a 5-year-old girl, Monica Artery, were the last two to be yanked from the second van. And he could not bear the thought of letting her go to these people. He was like, I can't just watch her. So he actually volunteered to go before her. As it turned out, the kidnappers had been forcing their victims down a ladder in a hole in the ground, which contained a truck trailer that had been buried under the soil. So truck trailer, like a big moving van.
Yeah.
The back of the trailer contained a table surrounded by a couple jugs of drinking water. It had mattresses in there, a couple boxes of cereal, a loaf of bread, and essentially latrines that had been cut into the wheel wells of this trailer.
That's going to get nasty really fast.
Real gross, real quick. Yes. And the children were also able to hear fans for ventilation. So what I could tell, like some of the pictures online that you can find, because you can find pictures of them excavating this van after this all happened. They had pipes that ran from the surface down into this ground and some form of fan that helped pump air out and in, presumably. But it's not going to do much. You're trapped underground in July heat. It's going to be boiling in there.
Would it be a little bit cooler underground, though? Because I know, like, caves are cool with that many people, though.
Yeah, I think it would have been, but it was not deep like a cave system is deep.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I kind of go over this a little bit later, but I believe they were about 12 feet underground, which is not saying that's anything to sneer at all, but like compared to like several thousand feet under the ground, like a
or
cave
several
system.
hundred, yeah.
Right, like a cave system would be. Once the children were in the hole, the kidnappers pulled up the ladder, tossed the victims a roll of toilet paper, covered the opening up with a manhole cover, and left. And I actually do have in here the depth that the children were buried was 12 feet underground. In the interview with 48 Hours, Mike Marshall would describe the waiting as moments of silence, then sudden just eruptions of crying and panicking. Ed Ray and Mike did what they could to find an escape, but there really just was no way out at this point. But after hours of being trapped, the ventilation fans quit and the victims were starting to run out of food and water. The roof had also started to collapse and the sides of the van began to cave in. From what I believe this was from the 48 Hours episode. There were 4 wooden pillars that were supporting the van roof that had like wooden blocks underneath of them to keep them propped up. And I think there was one of the kids must have been like kicking the blocks out from under, probably just panicked, not knowing what else to do, started kicking things. And like, I'm not blaming this kid at all. Like, to be clear, like, I can't imagine what I would do in this situation, and I would probably be banging my head off a wall. So he was probably just in desperation trying to distract himself, and these kids can't see, so he's not to know that this was supporting the roof. Not his fault. Not his fault at all. But long story short, the roof started to collapse and the sides also started to cave. These kids were like and Ed were like, we got to get out of here. We're not going to stay here.
All I'm thinking is like the trash compactor and
Oh.
A New Hope.
Yes.
That's the right.
Yes.
It's New A New Hope. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My brain was like, is that right? Yeah.
Yes. New Hope, Star Wars.
But all I can think of was when they're in the trash compactor and it's just
slowly crunching in.
Exactly. The little alien, the big alien trash monster thing.
Mm-hmm. As if you think about it, you know, a moving van like that isn't meant to be crushed in from all sides by dirt. It's not meant to be buried like that. So,
no.
Like I said, at this point, the children began to stand on Ed's and each other's shoulders to try and reach the manhole cover. I saw in some sources they were also stacking the mattresses on top of each other to try and reach that cover because they figured that's going to be our only way out of here.
That is pretty smart, though. Like, I'm not saying, like, that's nothing against the kids' ages. But, like, even, like, full-grown adults, I don't know that people would think about that as quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say I would. Ed and Mike both took turns pushing at the cover, but Mike was eventually the one who was successful in moving that manhole cover. When he moved it, he realized there were actually truck batteries, big heavy truck batteries, sitting on top of it.
Oh my goodness.
To prevent them from trying to move it.
And those things aren't light.
No.
I worked in a battery factory. You know this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, between semesters and undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having to put those things onto and they're like...
big, heavy.
Yeah, they're... Car and truck batteries are not...
Not lightweight, yeah. They were meant, and that was, of course, meant to keep them in there.
And then they have no clue if people are out there with guns. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Mike, like I said, was successful in moving the manhole cover. Batteries, the one source I read, fell into the trailer with them. So thankfully no one got bonked in the head, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
Which is how they realized, like, man, they really had us trapped in here. But then he had to continue to dig his way out because they, like I said, they were 12 feet underground. I'm not sure how tall this trailer was, so I'm not entirely sure how many feet of dirt they had to, like, dig their way out of. But either way, not a great scenario. When Mike finally got to the surface, he had another challenge to contend with because the kidnappers not only had covered the manhole cover with truck batteries in the dirt, but then they built a plywood box around the whole opening. So he had to break his way out of that. And like you said, everyone was really scared. In a recording he made after the kidnapping, Mike stated, the children and Ed didn't know what was on the other side of the box. So even though they had success in getting out of the hole, it was still really scary to try and get out of there for fear the kidnappers could be on the other side. And they know these people have guns. They could just kill us. They had no idea what was out there.
I wonder if taking the manhole cover, as heavy as that probably was, would have been like when they breached the surface in case someone was shooting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened with the manhole cover, if they couldn't, like, if it fell down in the hole too and they couldn't get it out. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure what exactly happened there.
Or if it was, like, welded in somehow.
Yes, it could have been. I'm not 100%
anyway,
certain.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So this box was just tall enough for Michael to stand up in, so it wasn't a particularly huge space. But he did eventually bust his way out of there, and thankfully the coast was clear. As far as he could see, the kidnappers were nowhere to be found. So the rest of the children and Ed were boosted out of the hole. Later, it was found out that their time of escape was around 8 p.m. on July 16th, making their time of entrapment 16 hours. So 16 hours down there in the boiling heat. The exhaust fans had quit. They ran out of water. They had nowhere else to go to the bathroom. So just imagine it probably felt like you were sitting in soup down there. Stinky, nasty soup.
Not a good.
Bad.
No.
Bad.
We're not laughing because it's funny. We're laughing because it's awful.
It's uncomfortable, right? Yeah. So around them, the children were seeing all kinds of strange machinery like excavators and conveyor belts. As it turned out, the victims had been buried in a quarry in the town of Livermore, 100 miles from Chowchilla. They found... I got a couple different ways that this happened. One way that I heard was the workers at the quarry, the night workers or the night watchmen, found these kids kind of like, and Ed, I keep forgetting about Ed, sorry, just kind of wandering, like trying to figure out what the heck just happened to them. And then I have other ones where Ed and Mike and, kind of led these kids, and they found the guard shack. But either way, they were found, and the police were called in. Again, thank God, none of these children were severely injured. Ed was not severely injured. Everyone got out. From the quarry, the children were transported via prison bus. Once again, we're on a bus.
I'm not laughing because it's funny.
Again, it's
but
just
can you imagine, God. Like, if I was one of those kids, I would never get on a bus again if I could help it.
I'll walk, thanks.
I'll walk, it's fine.
Right, exactly.
The littler ones, like, when they were older, probably, they'd start to process it. But the older kids, like...
Absolutely not. Yeah. So, they were transported via prison bus to the Santa Rita Rehabilitation Center, which was a local jail. They were transported here because this was the closest place that officials could safely hold them. They weren't in trouble, obviously. It was just, we need to get these kids in a place where we are going to be able to keep them safe. Makes sense.
And depending on how small the town is, that kind of like a jail or prison might be closer than a hospital, to be completely honest.
Sure, absolutely.
It might be bigger than a hospital, too, if you have 27
people that you're trying to make sure they're okay.
Yeah.
And exactly. At the facility, the children were given apples and soda. They were examined by doctors and unfortunately did have to be put through pretty thorough police investigations. Again, they got to make sure they get the details so they can nab the people that did this.
They, like, the kiddos weren't being investigated as criminals. It was an investigation to try and get information.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. They weren't being like, why did you do this to yourselves? It was just oh God, we need to make sure you're okay. And we need to make sure, like, we have all the information possible so we can find these people that did this to you.
So more of like a forensic interview than a...
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. So after about 4 hours of this, the children were put on yet another bus.
Oh my God.
These poor kids. And then they were brought back to Chowchilla, where they were reunited at 4 a.m. with their families 36 hours after the whole ordeal began.
So the families weren't allowed to go?
No, they had to wait. I believe they were told, hey, your kids are okay. Everyone's fine. We're going to bring them home. But they had to stay. Probably, if I had to guess, don't quote me on this for gospel, probably because the minute those kids saw their parents, they were going to be like, blah! Like, mom and dad are here. Like, I'm okay to just break the hell down.
Well, and we also don't, like, I don't know if they had any suspects at that time, too. I'm not saying, like, oh, yeah, family member, but, like...
You gotta look at everyone. They had to, unfortunately, do their due diligence. It's not unfortunate that they did their due diligence, but unfortunate because it's like, I can't imagine being an officer on this scene, seeing these kids, hearing their stories, hearing like a little 5-year-old comes up to you and is like, I was buried in a trailer for 5 hours, for 16 hours. Like, I want to snuggle you and give you the world right now. And like them having to not be able to do that. Just,
yeah. Well, I'm sure the police officers weren't mean. I don't know that, but I'm guessing
they probably had to just be like, all right, I gotta do my job here. I gotta, they were probably kind to these kids, but they couldn't just smother them. And
they probably had to de-escalate them too, though, because if they were really escalated, the kiddos, they weren't going to be giving them any information anyways. So they kind of probably had to bring them back down. Right.
They had to get them hydrated again, get them fed, get them just back on this planet.
Yeah.
After the escape and after the children were returned to their parents, the moving trailer, whatever you want to call it, was excavated from the hole and the quarry was searched. According to the 1976 New York Times article that I was talking about earlier, authorities tried to stake out the quarry site after the children were found in case the kidnappers would return for them. Good plan. But this plan was ruined by a bunch of people that were showing up to the quarry after hearing the news of the found children, essentially rubberneckers, which, like, ugh, guys, don't do that.
Yeah, not helpful in a crime scene.
Yeah, no, not at all. So that plan was a little bit foiled. More than a little bit foiled. I want to go into some of the investigation that was happening during the kidnapping. So during the investigation, the police actually had the Chowchilla Bank of America under surveillance because Ed Ray's wife and another one of his relatives worked there. However, no one had reached out to the bank for money in connection with the kidnapping. I think their thoughts were, okay, if this is a ransom case, you know, this is someone that works on the inside. We just, you know, we need to just kind of keep an eye on this. And like I said, that didn't pan out. There was also a slew of very just bizarre tips that came in. And I want to give it a grain of salt here because I think they were just desperate to find these kids and Ed and just were working on anything that could possibly have connection. And I also don't know how deeply they went into some of these tips. So, grain of salt. But there was a woman from Orange, New Jersey, who called in the tip to police about a novel titled The Day the Children Vanished. This book was written by Hugh Pentecost in 1958, and it was about a gang that abducted a busload of children to lure people away from their homes and workplaces so that they could then go back into town and rob a bank. Which is like a weird connection. Like, it's interesting that that lady made that connection. But again, that wasn't especially helpful.
I mean, it could be one of those things of like the kidnappers read it and were like, huh, this seems like a plan.
Sure, exactly. In a quote from the New York Times article, Sheriff Ed Bates had stated, "We don't know if there's any connection, but we're looking at the book." Okay, sure. There was also quoted in the New York Times article, the authorities said they were not, this is kind of confusing how this was worded. The authorities said that they were not now working on the theory that Edward Ray, it says he, but Edward Ray, was party to the disappearances. Before the children were found, I believe that the police were taking any tips they could, again, to help find the children, but many were not particularly helpful.
And I mean, that quote does make sense because if a busload of children go missing, the bus driver...
Sure.
And I don't think that's anything against a specific person's character. It's like, okay, who's the adult that's with them?
Yeah.
He was just as much a victim at this point, from what I know.
Yes, very much.
But
you have to take it into consideration.
Yeah.
He could have very easily, I mean, you would have had to work on motive, but again, like, he's what are the kids going to do? You know, the oldest one is 14 years old. It's not going to be hard to just say, I'm not taking you home, and just drive them to God knows wherever.
Yeah.
So,
it's a scary thought.
Yeah, a little bit terrifying. Judy Hensley, the mother of 7-year-old Sherry, who had been kidnapped, hit much closer to the heart of the issue, at least in my opinion, of who did this, why they did this. Her quote from the New York Times article was, "It's a group of people who either wanted money or publicity or both, and they'll get it. Look at all the reporters that are here. They're going to get the attention they want." Again, I feel like she hit pretty close to the heart of the matter, and we'll get further into that, but just keep that quote in the back of your brain. So the investigation deepened after the children were found. Investigators looked into the people who had keys to the quarry. Their theory was that to be able to bury this trailer in the quarry without being interrupted, whoever had done this would have needed to access, like full access to get into this place.
Yeah, and not be noticed by, like, the guards.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing, Tom? Oh, nothing. I'm just burying a truck. Don't ask questions.
Exactly. So security guards did actually tell investigators that they had seen 3 young men digging in the quarry several months prior to the kidnapping.
No one questions it.
It was the 70s.
Like, oh, look over there. There's 3 guys. Don't you see them? I sounded like I was from, like, Minnesota for a second there.
Minnesota.
Hollister strikes again.
Don't you know? Don't you see them?
I cut that out, too.
That's okay.
That was like a 10-minute tangent. Minnesota Alistair strikes again.
Yes, Minnesota Alistair. That's going to be our feral button. I'm going to make that.
I'm keeping that in for our lovely listeners. There was a whole tangent about the haunted radio in Milwaukee, which is not... Is that in
Milwaukee... Oh, man, where is Milwaukee? Ah!
up north somewhere close to Canada.
Yeah.
And we got a 10-minute tangent about Alistair the Radio Demon from Hazbin Hotel with a Milwaukee accent that I cut out because it wasn't really pertinent. This isn't pertinent either, but I decided
we need a palate cleanser because this is a heavy episode.
He strikes again.
He does strike again. Go watch Hazbin Hotel.
Okay, back.
So back to these security guards watching people dig in the hole.
Who apparently need retrained on what being a security guard means.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. So the investigation quickly led them to one Frederick Newhall Woods IV.
What a name.
Let's get into it. One, he already had a police record. He had formerly been arrested for grand theft auto along with two other men, James and Richard Schoenfeld. James, who was 24 at the time of the kidnapping, was Fred's partner in a used car business. Richard, who was 22 at the time of the kidnapping, was James's younger brother. They were also the sons of a well-known, I believe it was actually a foot doctor.
It's not funny,
it just adds to it. All three of these young men were from wealthy families. They weren't po folk by any stretch. In the case of the grand theft auto incident, all three of these men were let off this charge with a fine and probation. So they got nothing for them. They got a slap on the wrist.
What kind of car did they steal?
That I'm not sure.
It's not pertinent. I'm just
just curious. Yeah, that I'm not 100% sure. The second piece of information against Fred Woods, he was identified as one of the men the quarry security guards had seen digging in the pit. The third piece of information, he was the son of the man who owned the quarry. There it is. Investigators got a warrant for Fred's father's estate where they found a crazy amount of evidence against all three of these men, including but not limited to a gun used during the kidnapping, a document labeled Plan, laying out all the details of the crime, a list of the names and ages of the children which had been taken when the kidnappers were putting the children into the hole, and the draft of a ransom note.
So, I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm like...
How stupid.
It's like literally, and like, I'm not making light of this terrifying thing that happened. It is like a freaking cartoon villain.
Yes. They're idiots. I'm going to say it. They're idiots.
Like literally cartoon villains.
Yes. Correct.
It's like the henchman from 101 Dalmatians.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, and it goes back to we were saying this seems like a half-baked plan of, we're not going to have footprints around outside the bus, but we're going to have tire tracks to these fans. It's premeditated, but not well.
I take it back. The plan didn't even make it in the oven.
Yeah.
It's not half-baked. They just had the ingredients and didn't actually throw it in the oven.
Yes. It gets better.
Oh my goodness.
So I mentioned this ransom note. No ransom was ever reported. Why? In the 1976 New York Times article, it was reported that 24 hours after the disappearance, no ransom had been called in by the kidnappers. It was found out the kidnappers were not ever able to make their ransom demands. When they tried to call into the Chowchilla Police Department after kidnapping these kids, the phone lines were so jammed due to the number of people calling in about the kidnapping case. This was press. That was people calling in tips, probably scared parents. They couldn't get through.
Why not call another police station?
Well, would you like to take a guess at what these three geniuses did while waiting for the phone lines to clear?
Took a nap.
They took a nap.
Am I right?
They took a I'm going to say it. They took a fucking nap. They buried 27 people alive and took a nap. Again, I'm not laughing.
Were they on drugs?
No.
What?
Not to my knowledge. Not that.
I mean, it was the 70s.
It was the 70s.
I'm taking my coat off.
How do you fall asleep? You buried 27... Again, I'm not laughing because this is funny. I'm laughing
ridiculous.
Because, my God, how do you bury 27 people alive and then just be like, I'm kind of sleepy? Just no words.
No, it's like... So we're not laughing because it's funny. We're laughing because it's ridiculous.
Oh my God. Right. So they woke up from their happy little nap, and by the time they woke up, the victims had already escaped and been found. So they did all this, not that there should have ever been a purpose behind this anyway, but they did all this. They traumatized these people to not even put a ransom in.
One of my questions I wrote down was like, what the heck was the motive for this? Because
we're getting it.
Yeah,
we're getting it. Don't you worry. In the end, Richard Schoenfeld turned himself into the police. Fred and James were another matter. They tried to make a run for it. James was caught in California, but Fred actually made it all the way to Vancouver, Canada, before he was arrested by the Canadian Mounties, which go Mounties.
I have this picture of him being ran down by horses. This is a really stupid question. I've been to Canada. Do they actually ride horses for the Mounties?
I think so, as far as I'm aware.
So my vision could be correct then.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've actually seen the Mountie, the Horse Expo in Harrisburg.
Oh my goodness, they do, don't they?
Yeah, they're amazing.
We probably saw them together, and I forgot.
This was actually, for me, the first, I think I've only ever seen them once, ? This was when I was, like, really little. I was, probably under 10 years old.
Never mind, I didn't know you then.
No, that's okay. But they were, if you get a chance to see the Mounties in their drill, oh man, they are, whew! And I have a pin. There was a Mountie that was, after the drill team demonstration, they were just walking around like on the floor, and they saw me and my friend who I was there with, and they gave us Mountie pins, and I still have it. It's so cool. I felt like the coolest person alive.
That is so cool.
It was very cool. So there's another little palate cleanser. So motive. Let's talk about it. Fred and James were in debt. They had this grandiose idea of restoring and living in this old mansion by the name of the Rengstorff House, located in Mountain View, California. The mansion was built in 1867 for a settler by the name of Henry Rengstorff, who had come to California in hopes of striking it rich during the gold rush, as many people did. At the time of the kidnapping, the house was run down, it was abandoned, but the person who owned the property had put the offer out there that they are going to give this mansion to anyone completely free, have it at no charge, if they will move that house off the property. Fred and James thought this was a great idea. However, that didn't mean that they wouldn't have any cost with this house. Reportedly, in 1975, the Mountain View City Council had approved a proposal from Fred Woods and James Schoenfeld to purchase a half-acre lot from the city where they planned to move this historic house, which cost $23,000. They would then need to actually move the house, which would cost an additional $13,000, and then to restore it to be habitable, it was going to cost them another $60,000. The men were able to raise the money to purchase the lot and move the house, but they couldn't get the $60,000 they needed to actually make this house livable again. Their solution was to kidnap a busload of children. This is really disgusting, friends, so heads up here. They decided to kidnap children because, and I quote, "Children are precious and the state would be willing to pay ransom for them. They also don't fight back."
Can I pause this for a second there? Because A, that's disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
Do they think the state's just going to let them have the money and restore the house after they kidnap children?
Oh,
there's more. Okay.
Back to them being idiot cartoon villains. The trio didn't just plan to ransom $60,000. Their ultimate goal was to get 5 million children from this kid. I'm sorry, $5 million from this kidnapping. Disgusting. Good old Wikipedia, stated that they planned to have the money dropped from a plane into the Santa Cruz Mountains, where they would retrieve it under cover of darkness at night. Another of my sources said they planned to bury the money, except for $40,000 to restore the house, which, that doesn't make any sense to me because it's going to need $60,000.
Do it slowly.
Yeah, that's true. Do it slowly. They were going to take this $40,000 to restore the house, but they were going to bury the rest of it for 7 years so they wouldn't get caught.
So they feel that the state is just going to drop $5 million.
Yeah.
And not put any...
Not stake the mountain out?
Yeah.
Yeah. And apparently they have a thing for burying. They buried people alive. They're going to bury this money.
What? Do you know what the money drop reminds me of, though?
What's that?
What was that guy who, took all the money and he was in a plane and he... You know what I'm talking about? The true crime case I'm thinking about is D.B. Cooper, who, in the early 70s, hijacked a plane with, a bag with, a crap ton of money, and jumped out of the plane.
Never just vanished.
Poofed on out.
Wow.
I think I know about that from BuzzFeed Unsolved, if I had to guess.
I love it.
Anyways.
Maybe we'll do an episode on that.
But this was before that. Like, the D.B. Cooper was before that. So I wonder if that's where they got that
Maybe
idea.
They got inspired from it. It's possible. Anything.
Also, I'm not laughing because it's funny. I imagine them standing, like, at the exact drop spot and then getting smashed by money.
Ed Bates, the sheriff, believed that James and Richard were followers and just went along with this plan, following Fred. Richard, I will say, was, I believe, the only two of them to ever truly show, at least at this time, to, like, show remorse.
He turned himself in, correct?
He was the one that turned himself in, yes.
And I'm sorry, whenever you say Bates, I think of Psycho.
Yeah, fair.
What is the...
Norman
Bates, sorry.
This case did eventually go to trial. The three men pled guilty to 27 counts of kidnapping for ransom and robbery. Where the trial occurred was they refused to plead guilty to 8 counts of bodily harm. If they had pled guilty to these counts, they would have automatically be sentenced to life in prison, no possibility of parole. They would have been locked away forever. The trial was held for these counts of bodily harm, was held 16 months after the kidnapping. And some of the children did testify to being physically injured by the kidnappers. Mostly it was cuts and bruises. The kidnappers were thankfully found guilty and ended up being given life sentences without the possibility of parole. We ain't done yet.
How long did it, because 2 of them ran, right?
Yeah.
How long did it take them to catch?
I don't remember exactly. I don't think it was especially long. I think they were pretty quick at getting them.
It takes a hot minute to get from Central California to Vancouver.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was instantaneous, but...
It wasn't months and months.
No, not to my knowledge, I should say that. So while the survivors were relieved that the kidnappers were in prison, they still suffered really serious after effects of the kidnapping. The children and Ed were hailed as heroes and actually treated to a trip to Disneyland. In Larry Park's words, and Larry Park was 6 at the time of this kidnapping, everyone thought that being the trip to Disneyland was great because the good memories of Disneyland would overshadow the bad memories of the kidnapping. However, we both know that's not how trauma or memory works.
Well, and can you imagine just surviving that and then you're... Disney World or Disneyland? It doesn't matter.
Disneyland.
That's the one in California.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's like, you would be so overstimulated, right? Because you just survived where you're just crowded with all these people, and then you are in like...
It's like overstimulated in like the opposite way, like the reverse direction. Still just like, you know what I mean? If that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah.
Like,
but you're still like, I'm guessing at those parks, right? There's still so much sound. There's still like you're above ground for some of the... I've never been to Disneyland, and I've been to Disney World when I was 4 or 5. So
right. But it's very...
Yeah, I can see the thought, though, of, okay, they deserve something nice. They deserve...
Yeah. And it's like, oh, these are our local heroes. Like, these are these kids that survived this horrible, tragic thing. But meanwhile, these kids are like, we just survived this horrible, tragic thing. Like, oh my goodness. So the survivors all suffered mental scars in different ways after the kidnapping. Jennifer Brown Hyde, she was then Jennifer Brown, who was 9 at the time, described it as being hard to go back and just be a normal kid after going through something so traumatic. Mike Marshall really struggled with not being able to tell his own story of being the first child to dig everyone out. I want to make it really, and I'm going to say this again, I want to make it really clear here, I do not blame Mike for feeling the way he was feeling in the slightest. He had intended to tell the gathered media reporters the story, like after, I believe, I couldn't 100% tell when this happened, this particular area. I'm not sure if it was when they got back to Chowchilla, like when they were going to meet their parents, if there was media there, or when they were released from, I believe that's when it was, is when they were trying to get back to their parents. Don't quote that for gospel. So like I said, he had intended to tell this media, the media gathered there, like, I dug everyone out, like, I stood on people's shoulders, I think he stood on Ed's shoulders or on the mattresses, and like, I was the one that got that manhole cover moved. I was the first one out of that plywood box. But his school principal actually stepped in and told the reporters to back off, which, well-intentioned. Like, he was like, okay, guys, these kids have been through enough. Like, you need to back off. while, and again, his heart was in the right place, but Mike felt like he had kind of been robbed of that opportunity to tell his story.
He didn't get a chance to take ownership over it.
Correct. Yes. A quote from a CNN article about the kidnappings quoted him as saying, "It was my chance to tell the world what happened, getting out and everything. And I didn't do it. I let the grown-ups do it." On top of that, attention was also very often turned to Ed Ray for helping the children escape, I think because he was the adult in the situation. And Mike was not really credited for it by anyone except for the kids who were there. Larry Park was actually quoted as saying, like, "We were trying to tell everyone, like, no, it was Mike. Mike got us out, but it felt like no one was listening." And Mike also felt really, really guilty for feeling the way he was feeling. In the CNN article that I was quoting, another quote by him stated, "I remember thinking to myself, why am I feeling like this? What is wrong with me?" When he felt like he should just feel grateful that they all made it out. It's really sad.
And it's very, very common to have these very complicated feelings after something this traumatic.
Sure.
But like you said, the principal was well intended. He was probably like, I need to give these kids because that's what they are.
Yeah,
they're children.
They're babies.
Even at 14, you're
a kid.
You know, that they don't need the media hounding them. But he also sounds like there's no way you wouldn't be older than your age after that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I would hope that they got these kids some kind of mental health help, but it was, I don't know what that was like in the 70s. I wasn't born yet.
It was the 70s. Yeah. So Mike felt like he couldn't tell his story, which we kind of said this. That's a huge part of releasing a trauma, is just being able to speak about it. Or at least I feel like for a lot of people.
And take ownership, yeah.
Yeah. People also didn't recognize him for the part he played, which I feel like he has right to feel bad over. I don't think he was trying to beat his chest and act like, oh, I saved the day. I think he was just, like you said, just trying to take ownership over it and seeing another person being praised in his place. Like, that had to have hurt.
Yeah, and what was the bus driver's name? Ed. I could imagine after that he probably didn't want the credit either.
No, Ed was I actually have this in here. Ed was reportedly embarrassed by all the news attention and did not act like the hero. And the other side of it I thought of as I was doing this research was, I can't imagine the trauma of, like, yes, he was the first person out of that box, thank God, but, like, the trauma of being like, well, I could punch through this box wall, I could dig my way out from this, and I could get shot in the head.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine how scared he must have been and how brave he had to have been to be able to do that, and then just to feel like I'm not even being credited for that. Like, that's just so hard.
Although I wonder how much, like, in the moment he was thinking about that, or if it was like, I am literally being buried alive. I have to get out of here.
Adrenaline and just get the hell out, get the hell out, get the hell out.
Just the stress response of, like, you don't think with your thinking brain, you think with your animal brain, and the instinct is, I'm underground, I need to get out.
Sure.
So, I don't...
It's hard to say what exactly.
Someone should interview him and he can tell us.
Yes. Moving on from Mike a little bit here. Larry Park, who I mentioned was, I believe, 6 years old at the time. He had really severe nightmares after the kidnapping, and the quote-unquote experts at the time told his parents not to go into his room when he woke up screaming because it would, quote, reward the behavior. So basically, they told these parents not to comfort their traumatized child because he would, like, essentially they were sleep training this child, except again, that's not how trauma works. And in the 70s, and in the 70s, like, that's what they had. So it's like, ugh. And his 8-year-old sister was also a survivor of this kidnapping. So they got kidnapped together.
Oh.
And she was like his best friend, but she became very introverted and was just constantly hiding in her room. It was also stated that the children often suffered from panic attacks, and many developed very different fears related to the kidnapping, such as probably the most common ones, fear of the dark and fear of cars.
Or fear of being crowded, fear of claustrophobia. I can imagine being
One of the ones that sticks in my mind is they were afraid of wind. That was one of the ones that apparently they were, like, getting...
Because of the fans running?
Potentially, yeah. Just really sad. So, we're going to make our matters even worse here.
Great.
Sorry, guys.
Great.
Sorry, guys. 4 years after the trial, the kidnappers' lawyers appealed the charges of bodily harm. One judge on the panel hearing this appeal was Judge William Newsom. He was a strong believer in rehabilitation for felons.
I get to a point.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. I think we're thinking along the same lines. Because I am too. I 100% believe in like trying to rehab people. I don't think locking people away is especially helpful. Even after this judge retired, he was a huge advocate for these kidnappers. To quote the CBS article where I got this information, he said the crime was just a youthful stunt that had no vicious aspect to it.
He could have killed 27 people.
Yeah.
Or they could have killed 27 people.
Yeah. But yes, according to this man, it was just a youthful stunt. I'd also like to add in here, this man has a child. He had a son.
He has a child?
He has a child. I'm not sure if this guy is... He had a son who eventually followed in his father's political footsteps and became California's 40th governor. And I just would like to ask, if that was your kid trapped in that van, would you be that blasé? Oh, it was just a youthful stunt. Like, that kind of crap makes me really...
Judge's son? Or the people that were, like, the judge's son? Or the kidnappers had a son?
The judge had a son. Yeah.
I was like, oh my god, the kidnappers had a son. That'd be...
I'm not sure if the kidnappers ever had children. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it just, to that judge, I would just like to pose that question. Like, if it was you, would you still think, if you were the bus driver, trapped in boiling hot, sultry heat for 16 hours? Thoughts. Makes me spicy. Arg. So the court did, unfortunately, overturn the charges because the injuries didn't rise to the level of bodily harm under the law. I don't know what is considered bodily harm under the law, so I don't know if that means you have to have like a severe break. I don't know, but...
I think it's going to vary state to state.
Yes. Right.
I don't know. I don't have any legal training.
Yeah, but it's hard. It's hard to listen to that, especially because like we know physically, maybe they weren't hurt, quote unquote, but like mentally.
Yeah.
And it's really painful to think about. So the kidnappers' sentences were changed to life with the possibility of parole, and they would get a parole hearing every 1 to 2 years. And these hearings began 6 years after the kidnapping.
That's wild.
I know. Jody Madrando, then Heffington. So Jody Heffington at the time of the kidnapping was a constant presence at these parole hearings for all three of the men. She was constantly testifying against them. Richard Schoenfeld was unfortunately the first kidnapper granted parole in 2012. And from what I could tell, again, he at least did show remorse for what he did.
Do you think... So he was the one that turned himself in?
Yes.
I wonder if that helped his case.
It could have.
Once again, I don't have any legal training. I'm just spitballing.
To me, it makes sense. Like, he was remorseful enough that he's like, I'm not going to try to run from this. Like, I at least am owning up to what I did, which James Schoenfeld was granted parole was granted parole 3 years later, 2015.
Yeah, that's not that long ago.
So Fred Woods is another story. In my opinion, Fred was never particularly remorseful for what he did. He was obsessed with money. In a letter written to a friend in 1976, he urged his friend to write a movie script about the kidnapping, saying that if it was made into a film, he wanted a percentage of it.
Oh my goodness.
Fred also broke prison rules and was caught with pornography and cell phones that he was not allowed to have. He married 3 different times while he was behind bars. And he also ran multiple businesses in prison, including a Christmas tree farm, a gold mine, and a used car business. And he just essentially continued to make himself richer while he was in prison. Michael Benacci, who was an employee who managed 3 different parts of all 3 of these businesses, actually fired a workers' comp claim against Woods after being injured on the job. Benacci also claimed that Woods still had the 2 vans that carried these kidnapped children because they'd be worth a lot of money due to their notoriety. And then this man, again, is being stood up for by a judge who said it was a youthful stunt. I'm like, okay, but what he's displaying in prison, That doesn't sound like a youthful stunt to me. Sounds like he doesn't care. Eventually, despite everything, in 2022, he was granted parole as well.
That's only 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago. So, survivors today, I do want to talk about them. I'm gonna go from not so great news to better news to try and...
They're the important ones to talk about.
They are. They truly are. I wasn't able to get information about all of the survivors. These are the people that were talking on the 48 Hours episode, and it seems like they're the ones that do the most with interviews and whatnot, so have a little bit.
And it's possible that some of them probably didn't want any
media
attention either.
Which, good.
That's fine.
Good on you. Jody Heffington, now Medrano, did stay in Chowchilla. She ended up opening her own hair salon, raising a son. However, she remained really severely affected by the kidnapping in many ways. Again, like I said, she was one of the ones who was just constantly at these parole hearings. So every few years, she's just bringing it back up. And unfortunately, she did pass away in 2021 at 55 years young. Her son, Matthew Medrano, I believe it's Medrano, but I think I miswrote it here. It says Medrano, so I apologize. Was quoted in a CNN article stating that his mother struggled with a lot with mental health issues in her life and had a really hard time trusting men.
Understandably.
Yeah. Jody's cause of death was never publicly released, but I believe Matthew stated, and this was quoted in the CNN article, something along the lines of, it's all their effing fault. So, sad.
That is sad, and I think there's a lot of physical results of trauma.
Yeah.
Like, stress will destroy your body.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not trying to make any suggestions on how she passed. I'm not digging into it. It's not
their private. It's their own privacy, but it's no matter what it was, that kind of experience is gonna affect your entire body.
Absolutely. And just to, I do feel like this is important to put in here. 14 months later, Fred Woods went up for parole for the 18th time and was granted parole 14 months after she passed away, which just, that hurts. But I did, again, like I said, I kind of wanted to start it with the not so great news and move up to the better. Larry Park struggled with addiction and trauma-induced schizophrenia after the incident, but he is now thriving. After struggling for so many years, he chose to meet his kidnappers. He actually shook their hands and he forgave them for what they did, which, bless you. That is a strong, I can't say I'd be the same.
No, it sounds like that's what he needed for closure, though.
Yes, he did actually talk about that in several articles. He was like, I needed to forgive them. And he also said in one article, he said it wasn't good enough for me. Mm-hmm. I had held so much anger against these men that I needed them to forgive me. And he asked their forgiveness, which I'm like, I just want to hug this man. Like, bless you.
Because I think sometimes we think forgiveness is a lot about apologies, but it's not. It's about your own.
Yeah. And but he is now sober. He owns his own little handyman business and he volunteers as a pastor.
Good for him.
So awesome. Jennifer Brown Hyde, then Jennifer Brown, stated it took her decades to be able to sleep without a nightlight, but she is now a mom and an executive assistant. And in her words, she is living a wonderful life. Sounds like she had a really, really great support system.
I'm getting teared up.
I know. It's like, this is what we need after all that nonsense. Michael Marshall, our guy Mike, suffered from addiction as well after the kidnapping. He, quote, there was something in the article one of the articles, he started drinking to the point of being blackout drunk by the time he was 19 or 20 years old. However, he has started to become more recognized for the role he played in the escape, and that has really, really, really helped him. He's now a dad, and he's a long-distance truck driver, and I love this. He has a therapy dog named Blue. In a CBS article, he was quoted as saying, I rescued him before he was a year old, and now he rescues me every day.
I'm definitely going to cry now.
Dogs, guys.
And I'm not a crier, but, I'm definitely going to cry now.
That hit me a little. When I read that, I was like, oh. So, a little bit of afterwards, modern day, about Chowchilla and the after effects of Chowchilla kidnapping. In 1977, singer-songwriter Robert Goulette released a song called The Ballad of Chowchilla Ray. I've actually included a link to this song on SoundCloud in the show notes. It's from the 70s, so it's almost like a funk, I guess
70s,
would describe it. But it talks about, and I feel a little mixed again because this was something, now knowing what I know about Mike and how he struggled with like not getting the recognition for it. It's about Ed, and like one of the lyrics is like he made 3 stops but never hit the 4th or something like that. So it's kind of like talks about the kidnapping and how it ended and everything. But it's interesting. It was something that I felt like I wanted to put in there. The city of Chowchilla still remembers the kidnapping to this day. There is a granite statue dedicated to the victims, I want to call them survivors, that marks the spot where the children were reunited with their families. Ed Ray, the beloved bus driver, did pass away on March 17th, 2012. He was 91 years young. On January 27th, 2015, the Chowchilla City Council voted to change the name of the Sports and Leisure Park to Edward Ray Park. The renaming and dedication was held on February 26th, which was Edward Ray's birthday. In 1979, the city of Mountain View purchased the Rengstorff House, because that still exists, and moved it to Shoreline Park. It sat abandoned there for a couple years. Again, there were offers to turn it into all sorts of things, including a restaurant, an art gallery, an office building, and even a ballroom. None of them panned out. In 1986, it was moved once again to where it currently sits, 3070 North Shoreline Boulevard, and a communal effort was started to restore this place. The restoration was finished in 1991, and the house is now a museum and prime spot for weddings. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and there is no mention of the Chowchilla kidnappings or its potential motive for the kidnappings on the website. Because I actually looked at it.
I wonder why that is.
I thought that too, because like in my brain I was like, oh, I want that in there, that's really interesting history. But I started thinking about it, I'm like, this is a destination for like weddings.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't want, like, by the way, you could get married at this place that was motive for kidnapping 26 children. There we are, friends. That is my take on the Chowchilla school bus kidnapping. I hope I did it justice. I'm sorry if I got a little spicy at times. I get very frustrated when I talk about these cases, and sometimes it feels like the injustice just really gets to me.
Do you
have closing thoughts?
Do you know what I was just thinking? This is a really ironic thought, right? That the one kidnapper was like, I want a movie and I want to be notorious. I have never heard of this before.
Yeah.
So, like, while that's a little bit of a dishonor to the survivors, but I think it's kind of fitting that, like, I'm pretty well versed in true crime. I've never heard of this before.
Yeah.
And maybe I just missed it somehow.
It's a weird one. It's a weird case.
But like there's kind of that little bit of that smugness for the kidnappers, like,
huh. Yeah.
It's really obscure.
Yes. Yeah, I know what you're saying, and it feels a little like justified.
It's taking away some of their power because
yes. Yeah.
And I think you did a really good job, Christiana, of keeping the focus on the survivors.
Thank you. I tried to. Like I said, I get very frustrated when I see that, like, what I feel is injustice. So I tried to keep it more survivor based. But if I went too far off, I'm sorry.
You can't not talk about the perpetrators, because what else? I mean, I don't know what else to call them.
Sure, the perps.
Well, I mean, like perpetrator versus like kidnappers. Like the focus should be
on them, and
especially if the kidnappers wanted all that notoriety, don't give them the energy that they don't deserve.
Right.
But that's just my opinion.
If this ever reaches anyone that survived this or that was connected to this in some way, whether you're a parent, a brother, a sister, whatever, I hope you're doing well. A child, in the case of like Jody's son, I really hope you're doing well. I hope you're living your best lives. And if you ever need help, please reach out, because there's people that love you, and we love you. I will say this. We love you.
We do. Are you ready for the questions, or do you have other thoughts?
No, that's about, I'm about thought it out, man.
Thought it out.
Weird. Well,
so what drew you to this topic?
So I had listened to the Morbid episode, a Morbid podcast that I feel like I reference every single time I talk.
You reference it as much as I reference Believing the Bizarre, so...
Hey, we have our favorites. Shout out to Believing the Bizarre. Shout out to Morbid.
Do you think their ears ring every time we mention them?
They're like, man, what is this tinnitus that I developed? Sorry, guys. So, yes, the Morbid Girls, the Morbid Ladies did an episode recapping this story. I thought it was absolutely wild. And I kind of thought it would fit the theme of our podcast because we're not necessarily strictly a true crime podcast, but it's strange. It's everything about it is just weird, and we are something strange. So,
is this our first true crime episode?
I think so.
Woo.
Yeah. Woohoo!
Did this episode change your views on the topic?
A little bit with learning more about Mike, because I hadn't remembered hearing as much about him, and I kind of changed my answer from what is written there, but it just hurts my heart a little bit when I think of, and it sounds like he is doing better now, which I'm very, very happy about, but I just had not heard that side of it before. I hadn't thought about that side of it before, and it's like, it just makes it a little more, hits my heart, I guess, a little bit.
I think you did a really good job of giving him the credit that he very rightly deserves when you were telling the story, because you made the point of like, hey, he was the one that was like the first one
out and had to
live with
face
that.
Yeah, had to live with it, had to face it. And I hope you and your dog are doing great.
And your son.
Yes. All of your family. Hope you're good.
All right. What did you find the most strange about this topic?
Honestly, just the idea that someone could come up with a plan like this. Not just come up with a plan like this, but set it in motion. And again, something they say constantly on the Morbid podcast is, how do people like this find each other? Like it's wild to me that one person is just sitting there thinking, yeah, this is a good idea. But then they have to bring that idea up to other people. And these other people don't look at them and go, oh God, I'm going to call the police right now because you're nuts.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre to me. Again, this is something strange.
It is. And sad too.
It's sad, yes.
All right. So with those thoughts, we are wrapping up our discussion on this very strange and very different kinds of feeling emitting. Yeah, this very strange and this very weird.
Yeah, there's just no other way to put it.
Yeah.
Discussion.
So we'd also like to hear from you guys as well. So if you have a suggestion for a strange or mysterious topic, or a comment about the episode, or even just want to chat with us, there's a couple of ways to get in contact with us. You can comment directly on episodes on Spotify. So you could give us your thoughts on this specific episode, or even any of the previous ones. We do see those. We have to approve them. And you can leave a review on Apple. That is for the entire podcast, not specific episodes.
Right.
You can also find us on Instagram, or you can send us an email at somethingstrangepod24, so the number is 24, @gmail.com. Well, strangers, it's time for us to part ways.
Until we meet again, make sure you keep those doors closed.
We'll be back again soon with Something Strange. What a ride.
Ooh.